How do we address growth? As individuals personally, as people who are professionally in some role, or organizationally, how do we address growth? What do you think? What are some ways you're addressing growth, personally, professionally, and organizationally?
Attend coaching events.
Attend coaching events, thank you. How else are you addressing growth?
Accountability partners.
Accountability partners. What else?
Schooling.
Schooling. What else?
Finding a job.
Finding a job. What else? Progress. How else are you addressing growth?
Awareness.
Awareness. Doing some things to create awareness. What else are you doing to address growth? Assessing, absolutely. What else are you doing to address growth, personally, professionally, organizationally?
We actually have a growth management plan.
Good. For your organization?
Yep.
Good. Growth management plan. What else are you doing?
Setting goals.
Setting goals. Awesome. What else? You know what we've just done by me asking you, what else, what else, what else? Moving you to the margin this morning out of a doing mode of getting here, worrying about feeding parking meters. Where am I going to park? I've got an hour and I'm going to have to run out there, right? Doing mode, getting some coffee, some snacks for breakfast. If you haven't had a chance to do that, they're out there. Feel free to do that. A doing mode. And now all of a sudden, some guy on the stage begins to ask you these questions, and it shifts you from doing way over here to the margin, where you're beginning to think. And then if we continued, you would be over here in the thinking mode. And your thinking would then begin to influence and impact and shape your doing, right? I mean, we all know that, but it's just a good reminder this morning. So, personally, professionally, organizationally, we need people in our lives asking us thought-provoking, important, powerful questions. Who are those people in your life who are asking you questions to move you personally, professionally, organizationally from a doing mode that we spend about 90% of our time in? Anywhere from 75% to about 90% of our time is spent in a doing mode. The problem with that is we're not called human doings. We're called human beings. And the intent and purpose in life is to be. And our doing should flow out of our being. But our tendency in this world and in this life is that our being flows out of our doing. And we tend even to define ourselves by what we do. By what we do. So, when you're thinking about addressing growth, personally, professionally, and organizationally, I want to talk to you just a minute about this thing that we call a growth path. I like what you said about a growth management plan. And that's really what this model is thinking through personally, what is the growth path for me? Thinking through professionally, in my role, in my work, in my job, what is the growth path for me? What does that look like? Organizationally, what does the growth path look like for us? And when you're thinking about a growth path, if you're thinking through what that looks like and what would be the different criteria in a growth path, you would want to start with doing something to move you from doing to thinking. And as you build that kind of a process and what the criteria would be, you would always want to start with, here's where we are, or I am. Let's talk about where we think we need to be organizationally or personally. Here's where I need to be. And in between those two goalposts, any football fans in here? Okay, a couple. Ladies, I'm sorry, but I'm going to use a football illustration here. Try to stay with us if you're not familiar with football. But you're familiar enough with football to know that there are two end zones. There's a goalpost on this end, there's a goalpost on this end. And one team is down here on this end, and one team is down here on this end, and they're both trying to get to the end zone. And when you're thinking about here's where I am and here's where I need to be, the end zone. How do I get there? We call that in a growth path the growth gap. What does the growth gap look like in your life? That takes some real thinking, some real processing. What does the growth gap look like for you professionally? How do you get better equipped? How do you get better at what you do? You know, we're talking about being, but also doing. What does the growth gap look like in this growth path organizationally? And so you're thinking in terms of picturing a football field. Here's a goalpost, here's a goalpost, here's where we are, here's where we need to be. Obviously that means we need some forward movement to march down the field. And in life you don't always get 4 downs to be able to create some forward movement. Sometimes you got to punt. And so when you're thinking about what that looks like, you're talking about what are the components in that growth gap. And identify what are the components that I need to work on for personal, professional, and organizational growth. And then you're also thinking about what does the process to work through those components individually look like. And then you begin to think about in a growth path, what drives that whole process? What drives the process where there is no growth path? What drives the process where there is some intentionality in place and there is a growth path? And then of course you're looking at what are the delivery systems. So if you were mapping a growth path out, it would look something like that. That's just kind of something I put up there for you. It's a good visual to think through. Here's where we are. Here's where I am. Here's where I need to be. That's the growth gap. What's in between there? How do I get from where I am to where I need to be? By the way, if you're here and you're a manager or you own a company or a business, organizationally speaking, this works great with employees. Call them in, get their collective IQ, and utilize them and their level of expertise to help identify the components. What's the growth gap look like for us? Here's where we are in our organization. Here's where we need to be in our organization. And what are the components that closes the growth gap for us that we need to work on to move from where we are to where we need to be? And as we think through what the growth gap and the components look like, then here's the process. And the process for each component would be a discovery, clarity, direction, alignment, and focus. And we'll talk about that in another session. That process and what that looks like. What drives it? Well, when there is no growth path, usually what's driving personal life, my professional life, and my organizational life is that I'm making decisions out of fear. I'm afraid to take risks. Moving forward is frightening. And usually if there is no growth path in place, and for most people there is not a growth path in place, and professionally there are few who have a growth path, and organizationally we hope every organization has a growth path mapped out. And if your organization hasn't thought through what growth path looks like, then get somebody to help you do that. We'd be glad to help you do that, or somebody, or you lead that and challenge your organization to think through what your growth path looks like. Because for growth to happen, we have to have drivers different than fear, feelings, and fumes. We tend to run on empty. We tend to have a mentality that says, I'll put $2 worth of gas in just to get me to here. And so our drivers in this process, when there is no thinking through and we're in a doing mode and not concentrating on a being mode, there tends to be these drivers of fear, feelings, and fumes. But when you begin to move away from doing and thinking, and then your thinking begins to turn into your doing, and that means that you begin to think through what a growth path looks like, and you close you identify the components that begin to close the growth gap for you, and you work through the process of those components, each one, eating that elephant a bite at a time, and working yourself down the football field toward the end zone with that kind of forward movement, then what begins to happen is your drivers change. All of a sudden you've moved from fear to faith. We believe we can. I believe I can. Zach was telling me, he was looking at some research yesterday, and he said people are beginning to say something very simple about success. That there is one key ingredient in success, individually, professionally, or organizationally, and that is the word confidence. Isn't that amazing? That's what research is discovering now. That people who are positive and have a lot of confidence in their self, in their abilities professionally, and in their organization, that is a driver for success. And so you begin with a growth path to get away from fear, feelings, and fumes, and you begin to say, we can do this. Sometimes it's more, we can do it. It's kind of like that sometimes. And you begin to really believe. Faith. Facts. You get away from feelings and you begin to make decisions personally, professionally, and organizationally based on facts, not feelings. My personality style is to make decisions based on my gut, and I've had to get away from that because I've made so many decisions in life at 35 years old, at 53 years old, that I've learned not to trust my gut as much as I thought I could trust my gut. And I'm finally learning in life that I need to make organizational decisions based on faith and facts and a good balance between the two. Not based on fear and what the barriers are and my feelings, but solutions to the barriers, faith and facts. And then I find that I've got a full tank. I've got plenty of fuel to go that extra mile. So think a little bit about what growth path looks like for you personally, professionally, and organizationally. Now, what the Ask event is doing is saying that we're going to address the need for growth, and we're going to say that one of the ways to address the need for growth is to create a coaching culture. Why are we zeroing in on a coaching culture? In my life personally, in my life professionally, and in the organization I'm part of, we want to create a coaching culture. Why? Because the delivery system, the thing that unlocks, the thing that facilitates the growth path, I didn't put mentoring up here, that's certainly true, mentoring, but there really are two things that are delivery systems. One is consulting, we're all pretty familiar with consulting. The other is coaching. And what we're finding is that very few folks in the Sioux Falls area really are familiar with this idea of coaching. Most people, as we talk to them about coaching, think that coaching is the same as managing. They think it's the same as mentoring. And they do not realize that coaching is different from those other practices, even though you can employ coaching in those practices as you integrate this thing called coaching into your life. So creating a coaching culture, personally, professionally, and organizationally, is what we're talking about here today. As we narrow now from the umbrella approach and talking about the growth path, now down to creating a coaching culture. Why? Because creating a coaching culture helps us to highlight one of the main delivery systems that facilitates this thing we call growth, and it is coaching.